Moving forward towards the panel discussion, I would now like to call upon stage Lieutenant General A.K. Bhatt, Director General, Indian Space Association, to join Rahul Vatts on the stage. The Indian Space Association is an apex industry body created to be the collective voice of the space industry. General Bhatt has held apex leadership and management positions in the Indian Army. He has spearheaded several projects and has demonstrated great ability in building collaborative consensus while providing mentorship. He has headed numerous studies aimed at developing implementable solutions to complex challenges and has unparalleled insight when it comes to the functioning of the Ministry of Defense, Department of Military Affairs, state government, and civil administration. During a career spanning 4 decades, General Bhatt has been the recipient of several awards from the Government of India. The most recent include the Param Vishisht Seva Medal. Welcome, General A.K. Bhatt. And to continue the panel discussion, I would like to invite the moderator on stage, Minu Sirsalewala, Executive Editor, Special Projects, CyberMedia. Over to you, Minu.
Very warm welcome to the participants and all the attendees. If I could say save the best for the last, we have excellent speakers from the space community, and Mr. Vatts has already set the ball rolling. And I had a lot of questions on regulations and what's the hindrance, sir, but I think you kind of touched upon it. But if you could just elaborate on that, what are the real challenges? And I would rather ask you, what do you think are the solutions there? Because we do understand the challenges, but how do you think the community could address the challenges and take it forward?
Sure, thanks, Minu. Am I audible? Yeah. I think, first of all, let me start by saying that I have been in telecom for more than 25 years. And when I today look at telecom, it makes me remind so much, when I look at space now, makes me remind so much about telecom, right? The amount of opportunities which are there, amount of potential which is there in terms of doing what you can. I think this is really a green sector for us for the future. Having said this, the satellite comes with its own set of challenges. For last 20 years, the biggest challenge in the sector was, of course, how do you miniaturize the satellite, right? How do you reduce the cost? How do you improve the coverage? And how do you compete with technology like 4G and 5G? And towards that end, I think large part of the technology question is not sorted out. We have got satellites, for example, the OneWeb satellite is hardly 13 kgs in weight. Each single throw from a space like ISRO is going to send, 40 satellites go in a single go, right? 40 satellites going 13.5 kgs per satellite. 1,200 of these satellites, 1,200 kilometers is the space to which they go. Total 650 satellites are covering the entire globe, right? For a company like Starlink, this number is going to be around 7,000. For Kuiper, it's going to be around 4,000. So this is the entire ecosystem. So what is the first challenge in this entire piece? The first challenge is how do you get the spectrum under which you are going to operate? And I think out there, ITU is doing a stellar job. ITU has laid down a parameter of how each of the operators are going to get a priority over what spectrum to use. Now, by priority, I don't mean that I will get first and other person will get later. Priority only means if I come to you first, then the second party who comes later has to ensure that there is no interference caused to the first party. Right? That's the meaning of the priority. So spectrum is the first challenge internationally. Once you get the spectrum, you then come down to your local administration. In case of India, the WPC. They have to endorse the same set of spectrum which has been given throughout the world. Once that is done, now that comes a third challenge, and these are all challenges I am facing today as OneWeb, right? So the third challenge is that in India, we have not visualized a satellite operator who is going to operate with 500 satellites at one go, or 600 satellites at one go. So we have a satellite license, but we don't have a gateway license. So typically speaking, I require just a gateway in India to operate this constellation of satellites, right? But there is no separate gateway license which is today available. So I think that is one lacuna. I think the TRA has already done a consultation. We are hoping for a recommendation to come out. So that is one set of challenge. The second set of challenges, who really governs this space? Is it ISRO? Is it Department of Space? Is it the WPC? We don't know. And that is where the formation of InSpace by the Honorable Prime Minister is one big leg up, because you have a now a space regulator who is going to determine the space policy, and what are the contours of that is what we are waiting, and General Bhatt and his team are also pursuing with the ministry on that. So the Spacecom policy. So spectrum I talked about the gateway license, I talked about the regulator in space. The fourth issue is that once you have all this in place, then is the time you start actually building out your entire network, and that is where you require multiple clearances today. So technically today, I have to get an endorsement from the government, then go to InSpace. InSpace gives me a clearance. I have to go back to WPC. WPC gives me a clearance. I go to InSpace, they authorize again. I come back to WPC and now say I'm going to start a service. So 5 to 6 approvals before you can actually start a service. So that's the last challenge. And I think other challenges are more you set up in any business. Like today for a gateway, I require 20 to 30 acres of land. And when you are acquiring 30 acres of land to find a user who's single user becomes a challenge. But these are the challenges you generally face in a business. So these are the major set of challenges I would say which are there.
So General Bhatt, if I could continue, we were discussing it online, so you were also mentioning the challenges that we are seeing as an industry. So if you could just elaborate on those thoughts, please.
In fact, the biggest challenge I wanted to highlight has been highlighted by Rahul, but at the cost of repetition. Spectrum. What is available for space world over, in the low bands and the high band. In India, it has to be harmonized with that. We cannot have a different set of rules for India and rest of the world. Because the challenge will be the satellites which are being used, and I'm just talking of communication, in the LEO communication, they are not only meant for India. There would be anybody who launches them, 645 by OneWeb or a few thousand by Starlink. They would be providing ubiquitous communication world over. They cannot have their transponders working on different frequencies in different countries. And that is a very, very important aspect. We've been arguing it for a long time that 28 gigahertz should be shared, or from space it should be taken and shared and all. It would be, we are blocking or closing the door for international usage. And that would be the most important part. And the second is what he said is, we have to have a single window clearance. And it is to be in practice and not in theory. The government is coming out with an excellent policy where an InSpace has been created in the space domain, who would be the promoters, the sanctioning authority and the regulators for everything to do with InSpace. But the biggest part, that is how satellites will communicate and anything to do with frequencies, is still with the Department of Telecommunication. So that single window is SANS spectrum. I hope they are able to resolve that, because otherwise this also will become a major challenge.
So how do you see 5G enhancing this ecosystem when it comes to, because satellites are not new. They have been existing, of course. So where do we see this getting augmented? And where can we see it being leveraged for, use cases and business opportunities?
No, satellites have become new in the last decade or so. And what has happened is, mostly communication or even for remote sensing, everything, satellites were used in the geosynchronous orbit, which was at 36,000 plus. From one place, 1 or 2 to 3 satellites would cover for communication and remote sensing the whole world. And maybe only one satellite was required for India. But that had a challenge, latency. And that is why satellites were not very popularly used in communication. Now they have come down from 36,000 to 500, 2,000, and the latency has been significantly reduced. And the other issue is of speeds, of capacities, they are also being increased in comparable terms, like which was shown by Rahul also, and there will be very good speeds which will be available in the LEO domain. So it's a total change. There has been disruptive technologies which have come into satellites in the space domain.
Rahul, your thoughts on this, please, about 5G?
Yeah, so I think I tried to cover that in my presentation, in the sense that actually speaking, at least the LEO generation is already a 5G ready sort of a network. What do you require for a 5G network? A, you require a network. B, you require spectrum. C, you require a device. So as far as the network's capability is concerned, the 5G readiness, LT readiness is already there in all the LEO satellites. In terms of spectrum, I think the release 17 has just been finalized by 3GPP, where they talk about the interfaces for satellite. Release 18 is going to really capture it out in terms of 3GPP ITU. Also, the Radio Regulation Board of ITU already recognizes the requirement of satellite spectrum and what is required to do that. In terms of devices, I think you saw the Apple launch happening last week. And Apple launch this time talks about satellite connectivity through Globalstar satellite. So I think devices are on the same trajectory, right? So everybody in the ecosystem is now getting ready to be able to serve that. So as you are seeing the trajectory of 5G in normal, non-terrestrial or terrestrial networks, similarly the satellite spaces also follow the same trajectory, and we are actually 5G ready. In fact, let me share with you. Even at OneWeb, my current generation of satellite is still around, let's say, 2024, 25. From 26 onwards, we have got a second generation, which actually is a migration towards 6G, right? So already, I think the ecosystem is ready for that sort of growth.
That was just my next question, that how are you looking at, complementing these services with OneWeb association, and reaching out to the last mile? Because I think price is still a pain point, as always, so how do we see that also being addressed?
I think in terms of application, in terms of pricing, so there are two particular ways of looking at it. See, the pricing of any commodity is always dependent on what are you trying to address, what is the demand, and how are you going to reach to that location. Now today, let me take the example of US. We have got 3 strong operators in US. The average ARPUs run by these operators is nearly, if I convert to Indian currency, around 2,000 to 2,500 rupees per subscriber. And they are good, ample operators. In spite of that, US today has large areas which are unconnected. And that is why you have Starlink, you have got Amazon, you have got OneWeb covering those areas. In fact, OneWeb has tied up with AT&T for coverage in US. Recently, we did a tie-up in a community in Alaska. We are covering large parts of Alaska already, with large parts of Norway already. So if I go to the government today and I tell that I can help the government in going to the last known village where there is a school and I can connect that school, imagine the opportunity and potential which is available. If I go today to my troops standing out in Ladakh or in the deep border areas, and I can tell them that I can provide them connectivity, imagine the opportunity which is there, right? So this is the business model which is there. You are going to go to areas which are hitherto unconnected. If I can tell you that you can sit in a bullet train and still get the same type of connectivity you get when you are stationary, right? So the pricing of that is dependent on what exactly are you giving and where are you giving. In terms of that, I think the satellite systems are quite capable. The prices of devices have dropped down because of miniaturization. So I am very confident, on this particular front.
So General Bhatt, if I could ask, do you think it would be more of an initiative if the government takes the lead, as he rightly mentioned, the use cases, where we could start off with a larger use base over there, and then the enterprises start adopting, or do you see a parallel there?
Both of them, by my assessment, will move in parallel. Of course, like for the unconnected areas, where initially maybe, commercially it may not be a very viable one, maybe the government will have to put in funds. And I feel the USO funds, some of them need to be used to ensure that there is a digital divide which is there in far-flung areas and in the rural areas. And even in central India where many areas are not connected. We use these funds to connect India, which itself will, all other commercial activities will follow.
So will it be only when there's a volume game that we'll see some price effectiveness, or could we also look at some solution where we could get pricing to be very competitive?
So it's not about volume game, as I said. As I said, we are going to go to an area which is hitherto unconnected, right? Suppose you want a LTE type speed connectivity for a ship or for an aircraft, right? Now, who are the people who are going to serve that? There are hardly 2 or 3 people in the world who can serve that, right? So price is not a major consideration out here. Similarly, the government's requirement to connect a village or connect an education center, I think that is the bigger priority here, right? So I think that is the market, which is the potential. See, we are not going to compete with a pure telco in a city environment, let's say out here in Delhi, right? In Bhikaji Kamaji place or in Hotel Hyatt, are you going to compete? No, that's not our market which we wish to compete. However, if an operator is not able to get a fiber to Hyatt, yes, I am going to be available. I am going to give you that link which can connect any two given points across the planet, right? So that is our market. So our market is backhaul, our market is unconnected areas, our market are mines, hospitals, centers which you cannot connect today. So that is our ubiquitous nature of what we are offering, and that is what we really want to focus
So
on.
not really looking at a number game here.
We are not in the number game at all. I mean, that's not the market which we have to address.
So as Rahul had just touched up on the startup ecosystem also, so General Bhatt, if I could ask you, how is ISpA working to encourage the startups in the space sector? And what are any of the success stories if you have, or anything that you would like to share on? Yes.
It's the most exciting domain of what is happening in India in the space world. By the end of this year, of course, the first satellite is already up there, and by the end of next year, there will be 36 satellite constellation which would have been launched by a startup which is 3 years old. Pixel is the name, and they are going into a domain called hyperspectral sensing, remote sensing, which is in the world itself is a very difficult one. And I'm very sure by the end of next year, their whole constellation of 36 satellites will be there in the sky, looking not only in India but in world, and they are available for mining, they are available for disaster management and many other usages which one can imagine. There's another startup of 3 young men from small towns who are now being incubated in the Indian Institute of Science, who are looking at debris management. And they call themselves that they will be the Google of space. Because space is becoming contested with too many satellites, too many debris, they already have launched on 30th June their first trial equipment into space. And maybe the first solution of Google in the space will be from India. There are many such stories, and there are these 8 to 10 of them are really promising. There are 3D technology being used to make rockets. We would be very soon having rockets launched from India, which are being made by 3D technology, 3D printing.
So Rahul, would you like to add something to this? Because
I think,
you seem to be having that as an important aspect of your presentation.
I think General Bhatt and myself, we were very proud recently to be in Ahmedabad, where the Prime Minister inaugurated InSpace. And before he inaugurated that, we were into a small place where there were around 10 companies exhibiting, what do they really want to do in space sector. Of course, we were there as OneWeb, but I think besides us and L&T, who were the next big player, all other 8 players were actually startup companies, all of them. And these were, as General Bhatt was mentioning, these are people who are just out of their colleges. Some of them are collaborating through IITs. And the amount of variety in what they were offering, right from, GIS, from rocket launchers, from 3D printing, which General Bhatt mentioned, space debris, on space application parts, what are the usages which you can have on space. So this was so encouraging to look at that sort of ecosystem. And these are companies which have got a ticket sizes of, I know companies of size of 6, going all the way up to 80 and 90. So such an encouraging, entire ecosystem which they are trying to create. Okay, I thought maybe that's one off. We were in the CII conference last week, and again, 30 to 40 startups were there with various applications. And these are not startups on ground. These are some of these startups actually have an investment already available with them to fund, right? And in one of the meetings of ISpA, I think one of the big questions was that what should be the FDI policy, because the startups were feeling that they require more money to be able to invest. So that sort of vibrancy, that sort of discussion on investments, it augurs well. Right? That augurs that this space sector is now really charged up to do a lot of things going ahead.
I was just about to ask that what's the kind of impetus we need from the central government or, from the authorities, especially in shaping up the policy? So where is the need and how do you think that is being addressed? Or what is the ask, that we need to voice ourselves and put forward to?
So there's been a really positive movement on that. In fact, I have not seen such intimate discussions with the government, which we've had on the new policy, and how they've taken in our recommendations. after say we gave some recommendations and we had the second interaction on the same policy, those had been included. We are just waiting for the space policy to come any day. What we are told is it is in the advanced stages, it is with the PMO, and it is going to come very soon. And this would launch the whole story ahead. And the space activities bill, which is also likely to come by the end of the year. In both, the Department of Space has been interacting with us very intimately. And the two major, in the space activities bill, the challenge is insurance. So far, all satellites were launched by ISRO. There was a government commitment, the liability was the government's. But now private players will be doing it, and if the insurance is very high, it will be a cause of worry. So that's what we are recommending to government, that some form of incentive has to be formed, that the insurance money, the liabilities are not very high. And secondly, the returns on investments in space sector take a lot of time. And hence, we are recommending to the government that incentives like tax holidays, PLIs, and many other incentives, apart from government funds, will be provided, will require to be provided to the startups as they grow up.
So Rahul, as a service provider also, if you can wear that hat now, so your expectations and how do you see that really seeing the light of the day?
Yeah, so let me try to break it up into a couple of parts. The first part is today, the rules say that whenever I use satellite, I have to go to ISRO and to NSIL, which charge a factor of 6 to 8% of the, suppose even if I'm taking capacity today from SES, right? For many other satellite provider, I end up paying a markup to ISRO. So the first part of the Spacecom policy has to be that I don't need ISRO or NSIL to come in between, and I can independently trade that bandwidth from that satellite company, and that's what InSpace is going to govern. That's one part of the approval process, I think, which needs to be satisfied. The second part of this entire journey is then how do you encourage the ecosystem to grow? What are the sorts of initiatives you need to take that people are able to invest more and more into the ecosystem? And that, I think, part is what General Bhatt has already covered. Coming specifically as a telco now, always telcos have one ask, which is spectrum, right? So our ask is very similar, is that the spectrum for the Spacecom has to be clarified. We cannot compete on auction grounds with the normal terrestrial networks, and the reason is that the amount of market we are addressing is very different, and nowhere in the world do you see an auction for a satellite spectrum happening. So I think those are the three big buckets of asks.
So my question to you, so 5G from space, how close are we to this reality?
Like Rahul was mentioning, we are very close to it. There are two parts of it, and one part which is backhaul, it is already there. As soon as the licenses are there, for 5G backhaul, it is available from day go. From directly even to the customer, like the first Apple phone has been launched, and many more will come. Otherwise also broadband, when it comes and it will be available from the LEO satellites, it is providing digital connectivity all over. So 5G, there is no gap. It will be launched the day our satellites get effective.
Rahul, your thoughts?
I am saying that's already there. I mentioned about a project which OneWeb has done in Alaska.
Yes.
So we are covering a community today in Alaska, which is actually having connectivity of 5G from even terrestrial operators. However, the people using OneWeb are much higher than the normal networks, right? And because we are having a 5G-like experience already, available to them. So as I said, these satellites are all ready, LTE ready, 5G ready. And so it's very much a reality today. It's already happening, and I'm sure it's going to only progress with time.
So would you like to share any use case work in progress in India, which could be seeing the reality?
So in India, we have had some very, healthy discussions which are ongoing. We have had a discussion with Ministry of Defense. We have had a discussion with Ministry of Education. We have had a discussion with the Ministry of Commerce, right, for a lot of logistic solutions which are possible. We have also tried to talk to some state governments. For example, a lot of fishermen going down seas and they don't get any coverage, right? So what are the potential opportunity areas for them? Of course, we are in touch with various telcos in India for backhaul coverage. So it's already, even before we can launch, the amount of use cases which are possible are immense, and we are actively in discussion with all these potential users.
So if I could ask anybody from the audience has a question. Yes, Mr. Govind.
Yes, sir. N.K. Goyal, Chairman, Telecom Body TIMA. What I am surprised, Prime Minister himself has given the open space policy. He has said nobody should remain unconnected. Everybody in the government knows we have lots of unconnected areas. General Bhatt is here. We have pressing demand from border, our police, our army people to get connected. States like Assam, Meghalaya are crying for connectivity. And with people like Bhatt, ISpA and you as Airtel and OneWeb, what is that preventing the user doing business to go ahead? Going from ISpA to WPSU to here and there. Where are you? Every day from the top of the roof, we will have a statement from some minister, user doing business. So what is preventing them? And why we are not able to, you are right to the state. If the state of Assam says, I want to have this thing, what prevents them? I think we need to attract this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goyal. Your questions are always insightful and really touch the core of both the operator community and the customer community in that sense. I think there are two parts to the question. The first part is that is there an enabling policy environment to be able to achieve what you want to achieve? And I think the answer to that is largely yes. It's a new field for our country, but I think in terms of getting the pillars correct, I think we are mostly there. The second thing is about the timing of the services. So when I was young in telecom around 20 years back, also there were satellites which were going to give the same story. So there was Thuraya, there was supposed to be Motorola, which Iridium satellites which were going to cover the entire globe. Unfortunately, they didn't happen. Why they didn't happen was you have to introduce the right service at the right time. And the satellites were bulky, the equipment were bulky. So sometimes it's the confluence of the technology which has to coincide with the requirement. Also, were there use cases available earlier for low latency? The answer is no. Today, the robotics, today the virtualization, augmented reality allows you to do much more. Was there a market for connected cars 15 years ago? It was not, but it is a market today. So I think the technology coming at the right adoption time is a very important part. Third is, sir, there is a general lethargy, in the customer's mind also. Is that, should I try this thing new, and at what price will I try this thing new? Right? I think we have to bridge that cusp. We have to bridge that particular, requirement at the correct time with correct amount of incentives, and that is how it happens. So I'm sure satellite is just at the right cusp to do it. There is already a lot of requirement from state governments we are seeing, and I'm sure it's going to only increase with time. Thank you.
So would you like to add to that as so the ease of use?
Sir, I have a question. This is Alok Saxena, CyberMedia. Sir, basically the question is the information of weather forecast, which is basically based on the satellites. But we are still facing the unauthentic information or not up to the mark. For example, the monsoon prediction in India. Is the satellite accuracy is measurable in India or not?
If there is one man who is ridiculed world over, is the weatherman, despite doing an excellent job. The variables for weather are too many. My friend who works in Australia into this domain says there are 562 variables they work on when they predict rain or dry in a particular area. But I would take you to the other side of the story and the success. The number of people who would die because of the storms which would take place in Orissa or on the eastern coast of India, just see what the figures were 15 years back and what are they today. They are in single digits at times. The eye of the storm is monitored when it is far away in the Asian Ocean till the time that complete thing does not get over. And that is being monitored by the Met Department. Despite that, not that they always get it right, it is a very difficult science. It is a challenging science. But the successes, I would say today, are more than the failures. And India meets global standards as far as weather prediction goes. That is my assessment.
Anybody else, please? All right, so I would like to thank you all for this enlightening interaction. I think satellite is not so much spoken about generally when we speak about 5G and the impact it has on the industry. So thank you for your thoughts, sir, and a warm welcome again.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Minu. Can I just request you to be on stage, and may I call upon Mr. Ravi Shankar Rai, the MD of Savitri Group, to give away the mementos for this session as a token of our appreciation. I think they want a group photograph as well. Thank you so much to all the guests and the panelists.